So welcome to The Gathering Place, interactive website for Anabaptist youth leaders and pastors, a place to connect and resource on faith formation matters. My name is John Stolzfus. I'm the current coordinator of The Gathering Place, trying to carry on the good work that Rachel Gerber began. And so grateful to have each one of you with us from all across the United States and Canada. Welcome, so glad to have each one of you here with us. Our topic today is baptism, the practice of baptism in the Mennonite Church. We know that baptism reform was an important issue for the early Anabaptists, but our context has changed, obviously, today, and so we have to continue to ask the question, how can we make baptism more memorable, more biblical, more relevant, more of a catalyst for life transformation? Big question for sure, but certainly worthy of our consideration and discussion here today. So very grateful to have Michelle Hirschberger here with us to help us dive into this issue, this question. Michelle is professor at Hesston College in Kansas. She is chair of the Bible and Ministry Department at Hesston, and she has done a lot of thinking and writing on behalf of the Mennonite Church already on this topic. Some of you may have already used her book, God's Story, Our Story, for baptism preparation classes. If you haven't used it, I encourage you to check it out. So Michelle, grateful to have you here with us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, John, and thank you so much for inviting me. This is a topic I love to talk about, and let's put the radical back into baptism. Before I begin, just so you kind of know a little bit where I'm from, because our research does influence what we think and talk, and I also want to be open to new ideas, but so part of where I'm coming from, my dear sweet Aunt Maxine always needed to label her books, and then she's so sweet, I kept that label on. This is the book, God's Story, Our Story, that John mentioned, and because of what I perceive to be a postmodern shift, we did something new as a Mennonite Church USA and Mennonite Church Canada, when as a whole committee we decided to go in this direction. And I'll talk a little bit about why we did that. I think that's an important part of the conversation. I have also written academically for the Mennonite Brethren denomination in an academic journal called Direction, and there faced specifically the question of how long should catechism be. I was grateful that my Mennonite Brethren colleagues did not ask me to work on the question of whether one needed to be dunked or not. But understand, right, that also is an issue. And we've had some wonderful, friendly conversations about that. So what I want to do is to ask the question of all of you. And then as you answer, then that's also kind of a way for us to all know who was all on. So, I think it's worth the time to do this. And here is your question, and then I will give some answers that my students have given, but if you could keep your comments to pretty short, but that'll kind of set the stage for us. I very much want this to be a conversation and not just me talking. Here is the question. The question is, if you could change one thing about your catechism experience, your preparation for baptism, or the baptism itself, if you could change just one thing, what would you change? I told John earlier that my Exploring Ministry students would be here with me, and we were doing something special on this Thursday at Hesston, so they can't be. We changed class schedules and stuff. But I took a poll, I talked to my students, I changed the names, so I am going to tell you what most of my students said. And this will so you're hearing what first and second year college students are saying to the very same question. So here is one answer from Becca. I was too young. I would have waited to get baptized. From Kevin, nothing was explained to me, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I thought that very interesting. From Nick, by the time we got around to it, my excitement and my feelings were over with, and I wanted to be baptized sooner. From Austin, I only had one night for preparation, and I didn't like that. Plus, he also said, I would rather do it in a lake. I love that. From Wes, he wishes he would have waited till he was older. From Josh, what is he? Oh, I can't read his writing. Shoot. Oh dear. He didn't see it as meaningful enough. It didn't really matter what you believed. You could just do, you didn't have to have a lot of commitment. And so and he wanted it to be more meaningful. From Sarah, exactly the opposite comment. It was, in her words, too meaningful. She felt unworthy. She didn't feel like she could live up to the high calling that the congregation made the baptism to be. And then finally from Ashley, I wanted to be baptized but not join the church. But I was forced to join the church. So that's a smattering of the students that I have. And now it is your turn to respond with a phrase or two of what you'd like to change. So go.
I'm Joetta Schlabach from Faith Mennonite in Minneapolis, and I actually wouldn't change anything. My catechism was basically growing up in a Christian home and going to Sunday school, and in my mid-teens, I had a moving experience through camping experiences, and I came home and said, I would like to be baptized. That's time, and I'm glad to join this little church.
Yay. Good. Thank you.
I'm Corey Miller, pastor at Salem Zion Mennonite Church in Freeman, South Dakota. Under our current situation, I would like to change the time when we have catechism. It is in the morning, and the young people are not fully awake in the morning.
Yep.
And so, but we have a difficulty in getting everyone to gather at a different time. So I've felt that afternoons or evenings are often better time for reflection with the young people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that.
Hi, this is Shanna Bushhart in Kelowna, Iowa, and I had a pretty good experience with membership instruction and baptism. The baptism itself, it's a very long time ago, but I was satisfied with that experience. I think if anything, I didn't feel all like I could relate all that personally with my pastor in the way that he went about the membership instruction, but it wasn't like it was uncomfortable or, I was baptized with a group of, I'm pretty sure we were all girls my grade and older, about 8 of us or so. But I think that if anything could have been different, I think the membership instruction could have been a little more on our level or a little more personal.
Mm-hmm.
This is Danilo Sanchez from Allentown, Pennsylvania, serving as a youth pastor. I think I would have chosen to be immersed rather than have water poured on me. That was the only thing.
Yay. Good. Yeah.
Regina Wanger, Central Mennonite Church in Archbold, Ohio. I had a very positive kind of catechesis experience, and in the years since, I've wondered about perhaps talking about the vocational nature of baptism, how the rest of human life kind of flows out of that original baptismal commitment, and using that sort of language. And then I've increasingly become a fan of more water.
More experience or something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I shouldn't assume, Regina, that that's why you do more water. Maybe you have another reason. I just am like, oh yeah, pour it down. Yeah.
I'm Andrea Wall from Bethesda Mennonite Church in Henderson, Nebraska. And I remember certain points from my own baptism, but there isn't anything that I recall that I would change. I just don't remember a lot about the instruction, to be honest. But since I also teach catechism, one of the things that I would change right now would be finding ways to engage parents more in what we're doing, and so that there's actually a component that is taking place at home with the people who are most influential in their lives.
Yeah. Great.
I'm Shannon Tebow from First Mennonite Church in Bluffton, Ohio, and I was raised Lutheran, so my catechism class was more of like you are making a commitment to be an adult member kind of class. And like Andrea was saying, I wish that there would have been more involvement from our parents, because it was something that you did just to do, and pastor and youth director told us it was a serious commitment, but yet there was no reinforcement from our parents.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Josh Ruffer from White River Cheyenne Mennonite Church, Montana. My baptism was, I would say it was good, but as I have grown in my faith and my walk with Christ, I think there's way too much emphasis on joining the church, because baptism isn't about membership of the church. It's about being, it's focused on Jesus and the heavenly realms, not the church.
Okay.
My name is Carrie Lane, and I'm from Ottawa Mennonite Church in Canada. And I think when I think of catechism classes, I think they are too reflective of the school system. They study, they read, and so many of our teens, if we're talking about teens being baptized, are so burnt out from school. And then we're expecting them to learn in the same way. And it doesn't take into consideration all their different learning styles. And that's something I found when I was a youth too. That was really frustrating. That I think like it's this exciting, relevant thing. It should be experiential, and I think we fail at that sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm Lewis Miller from Beamer, Nebraska. And my own baptism experience was, I remember a part of it would have been peer pressure related. There were a number of my friends and others my age in the class. And so that was part of it. But I also felt strongly about what I was doing. So it was very meaningful. And as a pastor, I think one of the things that is a continuing struggle for me is how do we engage these young people after baptism to continue and take seriously that commitment. This is not an end, it's a beginning.
Right.
My name is Larry Nail, and I belong to the Julesburg Mennonite Church. And for me, my responses towards the classes I took before I joined the Mennonite Church, and where I thought it lacked a little bit, is I come from a Pentecostal background. And so the Mennonite and Anabaptism was new to me. And I thought there should have been a little more instruction about what it was to be a Mennonite and be an Anabaptist.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't been keeping a numerical count, but if there's one or two of you jump right in. And if not, then I'll go on. Last call? Okay. Wow. Thank you. Oh my. And this will help shape the conversation, I hope. One thing before I get started, I want to give a shout out to Shanna Bushert, who you have compiled a whole list of catechism materials, right, Shannon? Or Shanna?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm nervous. Blah, blah.
All right, thanks.
And so I want to acknowledge that and know that that's going to be an available resource. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. And let's all shape this together. If that's something we want to talk about more, then we can. I'd like to tell you about how kind of I want to go, and I'm going to reshape it given what I've just heard. And if some of you did not speak because I jumped in too soon, you still can. Just, this is a good place to interject. I really do want this to be a conversation. But here's some of the things I want to talk about, and I did it on, this is my old-fashioned PowerPoint. I want to give just a couple facts and statistics. I want to talk about what I think are some big issues that need to be addressed and some strategies. Those strategies include doing what I call experiential catechism, and I heard several of you mention the importance of that. So I hope that this is an okay agenda to follow. It's flexible. So first of all, let me just give you just a couple facts. I did do some research. I didn't find a lot of what I thought was reliable data, but just some. So maybe this is mostly anecdotal. So chime in if this has not been your experience. But it seems to me that most people, age-wise, make a decision, that's the old-fashioned way to say it, choose to begin a journey with Jesus during their adolescent years. And that would be my own experience when I was a pastor. And so I think it's important to think about that as we think about, to connect the whole issue of adolescent development along with the baptism issue. Personally, I would love it if more people in our Mennonite churches who are 40 and 50 and 60 and 38 and whatever, not adolescents, would also be choosing believers' baptism. That would say something about who we are and who all is coming in. So, yeah. So that's one of the facts that's coming to the top. I also did some research about 10 years ago when I was writing this one academic journal, trying to figure out if there was some commonality in Mennonite tradition about how long the catechesis is. And believe it or not, we are all over the board. So I did a survey, and you have as little as just 1 or 2 evenings to a 6-month process, and everything in between with what I consider to be no consensus. So I thought that was an important fact to add. In that same survey, I asked pastors to say, on a scale of 1 to 5, whether they felt very equipped by their education and experience to teach catechism and do baptisms, to don't feel equipped at all. And I was surprised how many people were in the I don't feel very equipped category. And I thought that was an important fact for today. I know I talked about baptism when I was in seminary, but we didn't spend a lot of time on it. So maybe it's good that we're doing these kind of things. Before I move on to issues, are there other facts like this that you would like to interject? I'll give you a minute or two to do that.
So you said that we were all over the map as far as from 2 sessions to 6 months.
Yeah.
What about when you're doing the baptism and the Holy Spirit moves on a believer that wants baptized right then and there?
Right then and there. That is one of the issues I was going to address. So we can just do that now. I think that is, I wouldn't have any facts about that, but I do think that that's one of the issues. So yeah, well, let's just do it. So we also, when is the appropriate time during the baptismal preparation process, the catechesis, when is the appropriate time to do a baptism, which is a connected question to how long catechism should be. And I say that they're two different questions because one option is to do the baptism at some time not at the end of catechism. Back in the day, and of course back in the day, I'm old enough that we didn't call it catechism because that sounded too Catholic. So we would say baptismal preparation, but we would never think about doing it in the middle. But I wonder if we shouldn't consider that, because I think that makes a theological statement to do it in the middle. I also think that there might be some advantages to being creative about when you baptize. So let's first go to the Bible and the early church. So one of the things that I've researched is when do people get baptized in the Bible, in New Testament specifically? We have several instances where there are what I call immediate baptisms, which make it look like catechism isn't even an issue. So Acts chapter 8, and Philip meets the Ethiopian eunuch, and he's studying from the book of Isaiah, and they talk, and he introduces Jesus to him, and he says, what keeps me from being baptized? And he's baptized on the spot. You have Paul and Silas in the jail, and the jailer wants to get baptized himself and his whole household. Then you have, clearly on another extreme, just 200 years later, which when you think of all of time is not that much later, still considered very much early church. By the year 200, the common practice for the church in Rome was to have 2 years of preparation for baptism. Now, there were 2 reasons for this. One reason being that almost all of the people saying yes to Jesus and yes to being part of this community, those people knew nothing about the underlying story. Here I'm talking about the Old Testament, Exodus event, the Red Sea, Sinai. They didn't know who Moses was. They didn't know who David was. They maybe didn't know a lot of the gospel story. But they're attracted to this wildly different, enemy-loving, peculiar, beautiful people. And I think that's awesome. A second reason is times were harsh, particularly under certain emperors, and to be baptized is maybe a death sentence. So maybe you want to take 2 years before you make sure that this is what you really want to do. Perpetua was a young woman who was thrown to the lions in the Colosseum, and she was still in the middle of her catechesis when she met her martyrdom. Now, and so I don't worry about the question of what happens if you die before you get baptized, because I'm here to tell you Perpetua had the real thing. If she's ready to meet a lion and be torn to shreds for Jesus, and her beautiful testimony is, it's incredible. But she never made it to the baptism before she was captured and thrown to the lions. But now back to the Ethiopian eunuch. I mean, we could argue that if he's already reading the book of Isaiah, he's been studying the scriptures, could very well be what we call a Gentile God-fearer, someone who has visited a synagogue, who is very well versed in the Old Testament. Maybe that person doesn't need the same kind of preparation that someone brand new in the city of Rome does need. So let me open this up for conversation. And if you don't want to talk in so many words, John, do we have a chat button where you can type in a comment? I forgot to ask you that before we got started.
Yes, we do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a chat button at the bottom. You can press on that to write your questions or comments, and several people have already been doing that.
Okay. If you've got, let's stay on the topic we have right now with some questions and comments on when you should do baptism or how long catechism should be. Do we have any comments or questions on that part? No questions on that one yet, John, or you're just reading them still?
I haven't seen any questions. I mean, my sense is that we need to make more entry points for baptism. I think it's a rich enough ritual that we can have multiple entry points for it, while at the same time increasing or heightening kind of the expectations for what happens either before, during, or after, depending on where the entry point is for each person. So I don't know if there's a question there that with that, but I think, I mean, I wonder if we can allow for more entry points, while at the same time expanding the scope of what we kind of expect or invite people into in terms of the training baptism, either before, during, or after.
I would agree with you, John. And the upshot, one of my strategies was going to be is to see this where we maybe more, the word I want to use is hand tailor the baptismal experience. And again, maybe setting down some real key principles that are always present. Principles such as, you really do need to know what you're saying yes to. So that, but that doesn't mean that you have to go through all of the education of a catechesis process before that baptism happens. Sometimes there is much excitement. And the thing of it is, none of us completely know everything. We'd all have to wait till eternity to be baptized if we had to know everything. But can there be a different process for students just coming in a joy and excitement to know Jesus, just filled with the Holy Spirit, but they don't even know who Moses is? So maybe they get baptized early, but they're committed to a long process. For those students who've been to Sunday school since age 2.5, maybe they too don't need to have a long process. And for other students who are maybe, I don't know whether or not I should be baptized, but I'm curious, well, that needs to be a longer process. Can we have flexibility there? Yeah. Right now, John, while I'm stopping anyway, are there other questions or comments just to kind of, we're going to do a little housekeeping here that need to be said before I go on to more of what I was going to say on either of those, on any of my issues?
I'm wondering, Michelle, as you were kind of talking about flexibility and realizing that, you know, students have different learning styles and people are coming in at various points of entries, is the idea of having a class with multiple individuals the best approach?
Right.
Or do we do much more one-on-one instruction or incorporate mentors and that sort of thing within the process?
I want to do one whole segment on what I call experiential catechism, but I'd like to first talk about why I think that's so important. So let me address that issue right now. I think we live in a completely new world than when I was baptized, even where we were at 15 years ago. I'm trying not to make too big of a deal of it, but I really do think there's a huge difference because we are in a postmodern culture. And you might decry that, you might not like it, but the reality is we're there. And the good news is that Jesus can do wonderful, transforming things in every kind of worldview. When I say postmodern, and we could talk for hours about this, but to make it short and sweet, we are basically dealing with a different way of looking at reality. In a modern worldview, we had much more assurance, borderline arrogance, that if with enough study and enough diligence, one could know the truth completely. And here, of course, our concern right here is biblical truth. We could understand without bias, in a neutral way, that we would get rid of subjectivity. To be postmodern, oh, and let me finish this. And the modern person loved to put his or her flashlight of scrutiny on everybody else who was different, because if you know that you've got the truth and are possible of getting the truth, then it's one's job to help to get everybody else on your page. You become postmodern when you take that flashlight and you turn it on you. And there's good and bad to that. The postmodern person believes, not every postmodern person believes this. As a postmodern Christian myself, I do, that there truly is truth with a capital T, truth. But I believe, being the frail human I am, I can never know that completely on this side of heaven. That I will always see with the bias, that I will always contextualize it, that I will always miss it in some way. Now, the bad part about a postmodern worldview is you can say, well, since I can't know truth completely, then anything goes. It doesn't really matter. The search for truth is not important. I'm okay, you're okay, everybody's okay, let's just all be okay. For me, and that's a problem. The good news is, I think in a way, there's some real biblical truth there. As Paul writes, we all see through a glass darkly. And the humility of realizing I cannot know completely helps me to rely more on my Christian community. And I think maybe can give us a more a healthy Christian walk with Christ and with the church. But here's my point. If our youth are truly postmodern, and I think they are, then we have to do catechism differently. I also think our postmodern scholars tell us that ritual, liminal space, a lot of times they call it, is so very important, that we used to say, the baptism, it can be a little add-on to the church service because ritual itself is not important. Having this head knowledge is important. Modern worldview, head knowledge. Hopefully postmodern is not all emotion, but it's the combination. Now the ritual is very important. We are re-embracing those rituals. But for a postmodern youth, catechism has to be different. It's no longer information, it's transformation. And that's a slippier, I can't even say the word. It's so slippery, I can't say the word. It's a slippery deal. We have to be authentic. We have to be real. We have to have integrity. So, and one of the reasons, and I don't want to totally plug my book, but one of the reasons this book is different, and I wrote this with the help of a committee, which is really hard to write a book with a committee, but to go really fast, basically, we decided not to use systematic theology and to use narrative theology instead. Everything that I received on which to base my book for examples, all systematic theology. That doesn't work in a postmodern world. Doesn't mean it isn't true, it means it doesn't work. In other words, in the old way, we would do one chapter on God. God is omnipotent, God is omnipresent, and God is omniscient. All true things. But for a postmodern youth, this does feel like school. And it's like, oh, I memorize these facts and I've got it. And it's even hard to memorize these facts because the facts they don't have any context. I don't talk about God being omnipotent. I talk about God parting the Red Sea, which shows God's omnipotence. And it's just more real. So the new way of doing catechism is not to do a chapter on God with propositional truth statements and fill in the blank, and it is this and this and this, but not this. But it is instead to tell a story which has multivalent meanings, which could be misinterpreted, which maybe does seem more slippery, but it's more memorable because it's a story and it feels more real. And quite frankly, dear friends, God is more complex than 10 little statements about God. Most of our confessions of faith have been written from a modern world point view. And that's pretty problematic for postmoderns. So our very way of doing it, not only do we need to do different learning strategies, I think the content needs to be packaged differently. because it needs to be story, and the story needs to go on. Second, whatever we do, we have to be authentic, because postmodern youth smell a fake a mile away. And in the modern worldview, I would have authority just by being a pastor or being a youth pastor or being a professor. They ain't buying it. You have credibility if you live it. One of the very best ways to do catechism is to be a leader who's totally on fire for Jesus. No pressure. No pressure. So I think it's because of this postmodern world that we have to do what we do differently. I'm going to stop, take questions. What have you got for me?
So Michelle, I'd like to add to something that you said, your first point when you were saying, it needs to be less propositional and more story-based. And I would add to that I think it needs to be experiential and less about what we put into their heads with instruction and more about how we help them have an encounter with the living Christ.
Yes.
How we teach them how to pray. How we teach them to have space in their life for stillness, for listening for God in their lives, how we teach them to be attentive to God's presence, all of that. Be more experiential as well.
I agree with you, Shanna, and I couldn't agree with you more. Leonard Sweet tells us that we need to be in our catechism epic. Epic stands for, some of you are laughing because you know that, experiential, participatory, image-based, and communal. And I love it. Now, as an Anabaptist, just a word of caution that if the more we can make it both and, the better. Because in the 1500s, and I'm going to sound I don't mean to sound judgmental here. The Catholic Church has changed so much. But in the 1500s, there was plenty of experiential stuff in the Catholic tradition, but really poor thinking and poor theology. How can we make it both? But I couldn't agree with you more. It's got to be experiential. Because if it is, because knowledge by itself doesn't transform. Jesus does. And for too many years in the Mennonite Church, it's just been learn this, learn this, learn this, learn this, and it's not been here. And that's the slippery stuff. Thanks.
Very well said. And I absolutely agree. We also need I wouldn't want to be understood as hearing that we don't need the instruction because, as Anabaptists, we have these distinctives and those are important too. Yeah. And how to do this dance. So I didn't make this as a strategy because I didn't think about it and that's how I go. How to be specifically Anabaptist. Call it what? Non-conform to the world. To be open and even well, you should never be proud, but to be affirming of who we are distinctively, and yet to hold those very core values lightly so that it's not rammed down people's throat. Because actually that's part of our Anabaptist theology as well. But that's a dance. To be differentiated, to say, because quite frankly, every college student I meet, they do not want to have you go, I'm okay, you're okay. But even though that's what their world tells them to, they're dying for something more. They just don't know it. But they don't want it rammed down their throat. So you got to do this dance. And there are some days where I just wish I taught math because it's tough. Other comments? Ooh, I just saw that comment. Another word is connected. Love that. I'm not watching my screen enough to read. I'm just kind of going fast and furiously. I love it. This is good. Any other word about the postmodern world? Because I'm going to do a bunch with experiential in just a minute with the strategy.
Michelle?
Yes.
This is Andrea. Do you have some resources you would recommend on postmodern culture?
I would. Well, you know what? Okay, I'm just going to say it. Probably what helped me the most was Tony Jones's Postmodern Youth Ministry. And, but I no longer use the book because of an integrity issue there was some infidelity, and it's too bad because he wrote it in the way I finally could get it. And that's, yeah, I mean, you can read all the great writers, but to get somebody who really puts it into a youth ministry context, Dan Kimball, Blue Like Jazz has been helpful. Brian McLaren's early work was not on youth ministry, but it was on helping understand that postmodern world. Yeah, postmodern youth ministry is because he, more than anybody else, says this is how your youth ministry should change. And I think he has good words for us in that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I'm looking at my notes here for the first time. That's fun. Postmoderns need this. They need a safe place to ask tough questions, because that's the authenticity piece. They need liminal space, which is probably an old phrase for all of you, but that whole thing of, and again, this is a dance. Anabaptists don't believe that the wine, we don't drink wine, we drink grape juice. The water, or the grape juice and the bread in communion aren't magically Jesus. That's good theology. But sometimes we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater and we said, it's just a ritual. Instead, it's what I call liminal space. It is by using our bodies and our senses, that bread smells good, by doing it together communally, by participating together. It provides what the ancient world, what we mean by liminal space is the distance between you and God gets thinner. There's only you open yourself up to a more spiritual experience with God whenever you take risks, whenever you do a ritual that's meaningful for you, whenever you do epic, experiential, participatory, image-based, connective. You just do. And that's Shanna's comment about that experience of God. So how do we in catechism do liminal space? You take them on a silent retreat. Oh, baby. You talk about risk taking. Yeah. So I'm looking at my notes. Yeah, I think that. Are we ready? I want to do one more issue and then do this experiential catechism idea. Is that okay? My last issue of the 3, church membership. This is a biggie. I'm going to give a case study and you tell me what to do. There's some wonderful, cool stuff happening here at Heston College, some spiritual renewal. We have 2 students who are asking for baptism and want to be baptized at Heston College. Okay? They've talked to me. They've talked to the campus pastor, Todd Lehman. If it were you, what questions would you ask? What principles would you use to decide what to do? Go.
Hi, this is Shannon again. We had a similar experience with our baptismal classes this past spring where, so I and the other 2 pastors teach the catechism class, and we were talking about some differences in baptism. You know, you can have water poured over your head, you can be dunked, you can be sprinkled, and we typically do pouring here at First Mennonite, but an overwhelming number of youth said, I want to be dunked and I want it to be outside. Yep. And so one of them said it and they all kind of said like, I want to too. And so we were like, okay, that's great. Well, let's wait a second. Yep. Why? Is this something you're saying just because all of your friends are doing it, it would be fun? Or is it because it's something that would be incredibly meaningful for you? So as a group, we did a lot of discernment together and asking them like, why specifically do you want it to be outside? Why specifically do you want it to be dunked? So those were a lot of questions that we went over and asked. And we did a circle process with all of the youth. Just so everyone had their voices heard and we could come to a decision together. Of course, we had a lot still be dunked outside, but a number wanted to be inside too for their own reasons.
Yeah. And I imagine that they learned to be better theological thinkers. And there are some issues where we also speak a theology when we're like, nope, we have to do it this way because that's the way we've always done it, even if we have good theology behind it. I mean, I also see demonstrated in the Gospels I see the grace in that. The issue with my Hesston College students is they don't want church membership. Or at first glance, they were just like, I mean, is it okay, no matter what method you use, to baptize students at a 2-year college that you know they're going to leave next year? But I love it, Shannon, that you did that process. That's so cool.
I would still make sure that even if it doesn't mean membership in a particular congregation, that there's some way that the community that they felt at Hesston can continue even after they leave. Are they plugged into a particular congregation, or is there a person or two that they can remain connected with after their baptism? Because there is you are joining the body of Christ even if you don't become a member of a particular congregation. So are there ways to provide that support and accountability that doesn't necessarily involve congregational membership?
Yeah. And that's exactly, those are the questions Todd and I asked. At first we were like, so first of all, do you have a congregation back home? We ask. And one did and one didn't. And for the one who did, we ask, we didn't have to insist, but I think if we would have insisted, you need to talk to your pastor back home. Can we do this in cooperation and in coordination with the congregation that has nurtured you up to this point? And she was very willing to do that. For the other one, it was a no. And so there, again, we have competing values. On one hand, I didn't want to squelch the newfound joy in Jesus. Baby, I didn't want to do it. I just didn't want, I couldn't. But the competing value is to be sustainable, to be a lifelong grower. That's not even a word. Again, as Lewis said, it's about baptism is the beginning of a marathon, not the end. And you know what? You need pit crews all the way through that marathon. You've got to have help. And so there's that value of you've got to have somebody to help be Jesus to you and you be Jesus to them. How are you going to do it? And so we talked to, this was a young man, and he was like, you know what? I'm really connecting with Whitestone Mennonite Church. And even though I will graduate next year, can I do this baptism in cooperation with them? Yeah. If there was no church at all, I mean, you know, we were ready to really encourage this young man to find a church, to find, and I heard at least one or two of you say, you know, church membership is a different issue than baptism. But I would say in my own theology and experience that we need people to help us. Where are those people going to come from? And can that be part of the public commitment? But I'm open to hear you all if you want to say, yeah, you can be baptized without being a member. I mean, let's talk about this.
I think we had a similar situation where we had a youth on one of our Mennonite year-long discipleship programs after high school. Mm-hmm. And he just became on fire for Jesus. It was the most incredible transformation. And he asked for baptism through that community that had so nurtured him to this point, whereas our church hadn't really meant much to him. It hadn't connected with him. He hadn't found Jesus with us. And we have to admit that when that happens. Mm-hmm. And the discipleship program did not want to baptize him. They were not comfortable. They kept putting it back to us to the point where this kid gave up and did not get baptized. Ooh. And I think there's something about baptism that is, they're also committing, right? They're committing to be part of the body of Christ, and however that looks for them. And I think that does look like communal. I think our youth and young adults are so transient. Yeah. How can we have them commit to a church, even if they're getting baptized in grade 11 or grade 12? Yes, that church has been with them to that point, but they may never come back for an extended period of time. And sure, we'll check in on them. And as long as, you know, the same pastor who can connect with them and people who can remember them are there, But I mean, the truth is they're so transient. Like, how can we tie it to that? I guess that for me is just a bit of a question.
Great comments. So maybe we change the definition of what church membership means. Maybe that's a whole new thing that needs to come about. Love that idea. I need to think more about that idea. Because there is this, I hear a paradox here. I see our postmodern youth longing for authentic community, and they're also extremely transient. And in a globalized digital world, you can be best friends with somebody from Northern Ireland via FaceTime. Do what we're doing now. I mean, what does community look like when we meet together on Zoom? I don't really have answers so much as that's part of the picture. Other comments, and then I'm going to go on to experiential catechism. Wow, this has been good stuff. Woo!
I'll just make one really quick comment, and that's that we've been doing a lot of tweaking, let's say, membership, especially around the associate category, because I think traditionally associate category in Mennonite churches were for people who maybe were in VS for 2 years or college, and they're going to become an associate member of this transient place but retain their membership back home until they're ready to move on to a permanent place. But more recently, some of our associate members are actually persons who are Roman Catholic or something else, and actually are retaining their membership in that community and also joining our community. And ironically, it's one of those who is Roman Catholic and now Mennonite, who is really putting the fire under us around baptism and faith formation. So I just want to put that out there to say that Spirit moves in very interesting ways. Praise be to God.
Praise be to God. Thank you. Yeah. And in all of these things, and so just what we're talking about with church membership, I think also connects with experiential catechism, which I want to talk about next. What does it mean to do the non-safe thing, which is what I hear you're doing? Let's think of something new. Let's listen to the Spirit. Let's not have this written up formula, and when problems come up, I always refer to this written up formula, and this is what we do. What does it mean to move with the Spirit? And at the same time, be rooted in good theology. You see how it's a both and. When I talk about salvation, I always talk about joining the people of God. I just do, because it's biblical for me. And an individual, I just got my ticket to heaven, baby, that is bad theology and has led to horrible things. And sometimes my Christian community has said to me, no, Michelle, you didn't hear Jesus right that time. And they've helped me to discern. I mean, what a gift the church has been for me. So I want my youth to have that. Let's move on to, many of you have called for this, and now I want to talk about it. I think catechism has got to move to something experiential, both head and heart. I'm just going to give a couple practical strategies, and then you add to them. One strategy is to do the entire thing in one weekend. And if you would like, I haven't done it, I can send to you, John, a typed up document where I've taken catechismal material and what it would look like to do a silent spiritual disciplines and working with catechism all in one weekend retreat, which you all, if you'd want, you could take and play with. In that retreat, I would include silence, which is discombobulating, but as soon as we get off balance, then we get liminal space as well. It includes a beginning exercise where you talk honestly about the baggage you bring, which is as trivial as, man, I got a lot of homework this weekend and I can't believe I have to do this, or I'm missing a big basketball game for this. And just to own that. And I have the students then shape pipe cleaners that turn into a symbol of what that baggage is, what it is I got to give up. That's the heavy weight I carry with me at the beginning of the retreat. then we take those same shapes at the end of the retreat and reshape them as to what Jesus has done for me, how I've been transformed through the weekend experience. And that's been a powerful ritual for me in these weekends. Another idea for me is whatever kind of catechesis you do, make it intergenerational. I have found with my college students that they are hungry to be in relationship with mature, caring, loving, passionate adults. And that the adults who join these relationships gain so much as well. It's scary, it's worth it. Another idea that I have is to actually form triads. We call them discipleship groups, but they are groups of 3. Depending on the personalities, it's usually 2 high schoolers and 1 older adult, all of them the same gender. And that mitigates against what sometimes happens is if it's 2 adults and 1 high schooler, the 2 adults forget themselves and kind of take over. But I have really had a lot of success in my own ministry with youth in doing triads and really working with the adults to say it is ministry with, it's not ministry to. How are we walking alongside of each other? The third strategy I would have for experiential catechism is to talk about and dream and come up with a Jesus project, a doing thing. So as part of catechism, you learn about Jesus, you read some key gospel passages. So if Jesus were here in Heston, Kansas today, or wherever your town is, what would he do? And let's do it. And I haven't done much of this. One of the cool things that we're doing here in our town is I have a student who's just very passionate about sweatshops and child labor. And so we're having a special fashion show at Heston College where we bring up the issue of sweatshops and child labor and what does it mean to make the sacrifice of not buying clothes made from those places and to buy only locally made clothes and to buy used clothing. And we have a woman who helps sell clothes that Kansas women make coming to our campus. That was her Jesus project. And as a young believer, it's this concrete way for her to be the hands and feet of Jesus. So I'm going to start with those 3 suggestions. And now let me open it up for suggestions you have.
This is Andrea. We've done a series of retreats throughout the year. Our catechism, we tend to start off with it kind of as a faith exploration class and start with kind of just we use your book, God's Story, Our Story, and read through kind of basically look at the Bible. And then we come to a place of saying, is this something that you want to do, is to be baptized, and do baptism in the middle of the year.
Ooh, yeah.
And then we do, at the end, we say, now we use your watering the faith concept, and it's like, okay, now you've been baptized, so now what?
Yep.
And then we start living into spiritual disciplines and thinking through theology and what does it mean to live out and be Jesus. So in the midst of that, we do a testimony retreat, where they go and work on writing their own faith story. We do a church history night at the church. And so we've done some like random times where we've gotten together outside of a Sunday morning or whenever we have our catechism to do more experiential stuff off of the church site for the most part, or using the church site in a completely different way than they're used to. So just to give them that experience.
That sounds wonderful, Andrea. That reminds me of one other thing that at least 2 local pastors in this area do to teach the Anabaptist history part is they've taken my Anabaptist game and done their own variation of that. Or most students from our area, and for those of you who don't know it, it's an experiential way to learn Anabaptist history. It's a 3-hour outdoor game where you try to find 8 different places where you see a drama where Anabaptist history is being played out, but you're trying not to be captured by the state church sheriffs, and you get thrown into the dungeon and you testify about your faith in front of the church magistrate. And it's pretty hard to pull off, but it's not, I mean, that's another way to do it. Oh, I love it. And I love the testimony retreat. Do you have adults also tell their testimonies?
What we've done is it's usually Pastor Jim and I that take the kids, and we go to some place where they can go off and have quiet time and reflect, and we have some material that they work through. And then they kind of share with each other in the group at the end, like an important moment where they experienced God. And then later, before they are baptized, we have them meet with our deacons. And we just go around the table and share about what do we remember about our baptism, or what's an experience that we've had with God, so that they're connecting and hearing stories from other people.
Great. Thank you. Others, your suggestions?
This is Brenda. I just want to jump in off of something that Andrea said, and that is how very important it is for the kids and for us to tell our stories.
Yes.
And to tell where our lives have intersected with faith, with Jesus and the church.
And it's authentic.
Yes.
Talk about authenticity. Wow. Yeah. They so long for real. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
We're just getting started with a program just because we have a new wave of kids, and this is actually primarily a middle school group and maybe early high school, but we're meeting once a month. Parents are taking turns hosting it, providing a meal. So a half-hour meal, an hour of faith formation, and I'm not sure exactly what's happening there because I'm not directly involved in it, and then a half hour at the end for just social, enjoying one another. And our kids go to all different schools and stuff, so don't have lots of ways to connect during the week otherwise.
Okay, that's great. And remember our call from someone earlier to let's connect the parents more. And I totally agree. We have a lot of statistical data from Mark DeVries. It says that parents are the #1 influence. And if you can't get a parent on board, a caring adult is second best. And so how do we creatively get parents on board? That's just huge. Thank you. I'm just realizing I'm kind of bad at this. We're a little past an hour. I'm willing to go on even for 10 or 15 more minutes, but I also want to be cognizant of the time. So I'm going to ask you, John, this is John Stolzfus, if there were some chat questions that I missed because I was so busy talking that need attention.
I don't think so. I think those were answered on the chat line. But yeah, Shanna just reminded people, if you have resources, send them to her so she can put them on the Anabaptist Faith Formation Network page.
Yeah.
I think there's some really great creative ideas out there that we can share with one another. We're not alone in this. And I'm so glad that there's so many creative minds out there putting energy into this and thinking creatively about this. So I think let's, as much as possible, if we're doing something that works, let's share it. And hopefully that will work for someone else. And feel free to adapt. Each of our situations, contexts are unique, but we can adapt those to work for our own context.
Yeah. Sacred space is something that I've used with high schoolers that actually comes from the Jesuits, which is just, depending on the individual, they love computer-based, web-based, interactive prayer. If you can find a real labyrinth or even a web-based labyrinth, which is kind of a different experience but still pretty cool, go for it. I have done in my catechesis what is called prayer stations. So instead of just me talking, you go to a different, maybe there's 2 prayer stations a night where you put something, you write something on a rock and throw it into the water, and that's giving it to Jesus. Or you guys know what prayer stations are, but yeah. Yeah. Anything else before I do a major wrap up? I've done way too much talking, but oh, you all have blessed my heart so much. Oh my goodness, this is good stuff.
I'm wondering, Michelle, if you have a concluding word for us. I think there's a lot more here we could talk about. And maybe this is a sign that we need to have another webinar at some point here to carry on some of these ideas. And I welcome, if any of you have other ideas in terms of things you would like to talk about, things we need to address, as Anabaptist youth leaders, feel free to send me a note. But yeah, Rachel, do you have any concluding words for us?
Or you mean, and by that you mean me? Yeah.